Picture this. You get goosebumps and you realize you're not as alone as you thought. It's a chill that runs down your spine and makes you reconsider if you're really safe. Well, that's what happened to a guy named Lucas. Lucas was a quiet, skeptical person. He never believed in those ghost stories, apparitions, or anything like that. I always said it was just our imagination. But this story, this one made even the most skeptical Lucas question everything. He was moving into a new house. It was an old building, over 100 years old, with dark woodwork, big windows, and high ceilings. The kind of place he's seen a lot of over the years. But Lucas, as always, wasn't swayed by the history of the property. He was just excited to have a new space, closer to work. On the first day, Lucas started packing his bags, and since he was alone, he decided to put on some music to liven things up. As he sorted through the boxes, he noticed something strange. Every now and then, the music seemed to turn down, as if someone was changing the volume. But when he looked at the sound, everything was normal. Must be the unstable electricity. Old house, that happens, he thought. He ignored it and kept working. Night came, and with it silence. Lucas was exhausted and decided to go to bed early. The first problem came when he tried to turn off the light in his room. He pressed the switch and nothing. The light flickered, but never went off. How wonderful, he thought irritably. First day and already the wiring needs fixing. Finally, after insisting, the light went off, but left that small dim glow, as if it was still on, but far away. In the middle of the night, Lucas woke up to the sound of footsteps. They were light, but clearly someone was coming up the stairs. He was silent, listening, trying to understand what was going on. Must be the house adjusting, he thought. But the noise didn't stop. Slow, deliberate footsteps, one after another. And they were getting closer to the stairs. Lucas, not wanting to be overcome by fear, got up to check. He grabbed a flashlight and slowly climbed the stairs, each step creaking under his feet. When he got there, everything was silent. No footsteps. No movement. Just the long, empty hallway in front of him, with closed doors on either side. He opened them one by one, searching the dark rooms. Nothing. But as he turned to head back to his room, he noticed something that wasn't there before, a shadow at the end of the hallway. She was motionless, just a dark spot in the corner of his vision. His heart raced. "What is this?" he muttered to himself. He blinked, and the shadow disappeared. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the flashlight light creating strange shapes. Lucas walked down the stairs back to his room and decided to ignore what he had just seen. The next morning, Lucas woke up with a strange feeling. You know that feeling of being watched? He opened his eyes, and in the corner of the room there was a small figure. It was crouched, as if it was hiding. Lucas blinked and the figure disappeared. He remained motionless, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Was he dreaming? Or was there really something there? The next few days only got worse. Things started moving on their own. He would leave a key on the table, and when he came back, it would be on the floor, across the room. At night, the footsteps came back, heavier, quicker, like someone was running up the stairs. And that shadow. Every day it seemed to get closer, more real. One night, while he was trying to sleep, Lucas heard the sound of someone knocking on the front door. He stood up, his heart racing. He grabbed the flashlight and went down to the door, but when he opened it, there was no one outside. Just the darkness of the night. But when he closed the door, he heard something that chilled his spine. A low laugh, coming from inside the house. He ran to his room, locked the door, and tried to convince himself that it was all in his head. But it was no use. He knew there was something there. Something that didn't want him to stay in that house. On the last night, Lucas made the decision to leave. He couldn't stand the shadows, the footsteps, the laughter anymore. But before he left, he wanted to take one last look at the attic. It was the only place in the house he hadn't explored yet. He took a ladder and climbed up. The attic was small, filled with dust and old boxes. In the middle of the attic was a rocking chair, motionless, but with one detail. The seat was sunken, as if someone had just lifted it. It was there that Lucas saw, engraved on the wooden floor, a mark, a humanoid figure with its arms outstretched, as if it were trapped there. He felt a chill run down his spine, and at that moment, he heard a whisper behind him, "You shouldn't have come here." Lucas ran out of the house, without looking back, drove as fast as he could, and never came back. And to this day, when you walk down that street, you feel that familiar chill. The kind of chill that reminds you that sometimes danger is in places that seem perfectly normal, until they aren't. I hope you liked the story, because the second story is even more chilling. Just don't forget to see if you're already subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any terrifying stories. Just imagine, Lucas was a normal kid, just like any other kid his age. He liked video games, rode his bike around the neighborhood, and loved spending hours watching superhero movies. The house where he lived with his parents was cozy, full of happy memories, and packed with comfortable corners. However, all that started to change one cold winter night. The first time Lucas woke up in the middle of the night, he didn't quite understand what made him open his eyes. The room was dark as always. The only sound was his father's light snoring coming from the next room. But there was something different, something strange. It was like the air was heavier, denser, and the silence was somehow different. He tried to ignore the feeling, thinking it was just his childish imagination playing with him. However, the next night, the feeling came back, this time stronger. Lucas felt watched, even with no one visible around him. He began to fear the darkness, as if there was something hidden in it that he couldn't see, but he knew it was there. On the third day, things got even worse. This time he didn't wake up alone. A cold sensation ran down his spine even before he opened his eyes. He felt like he wasn't alone in the room anymore. Slowly, he turned his face to the side and, with his heart racing, looked under the bed. There, deep in the darkness, he saw something. His eyes widened as he saw the shadow of a figure, the silhouette of a burly man, crouched under his bed, motionless, as if waiting for the right moment to do something terrible. Lucas froze. He didn't know whether to scream, run, or just cover himself with the sheet and hope it was a dream. But before he could make a decision, the figure moved. She took a step towards him and slowly got out of bed. All Lucas had to do was scream at the top of his lungs. Lucas's parents ran into the room immediately. The father entered the room, turned on the light, and found the man, a stranger, under Lucas's bed. The father reacted quickly, managing to expel the intruder from the house and call the police. However, even when the man was taken away, Lucas felt that something had changed forever. From that night on, his room was no longer a safe place. Lucas was now afraid to close his eyes. When he did, the image of that man crawling under his bed came back to his mind, as if he were trapped in that moment. But the scariest thing was that, even after the intruder was caught, he continued to feel that he was not alone. The nights began to become even more disturbing. Lucas heard strange noises during the night, sounds that seemed to come from under the bed, as if something was scratching the floor. Sometimes light knocks could be heard on the walls, as if someone was trying to get his attention. He told his parents about it, but they believed that it was the recent trauma that made the boy more scared and nervous. One day, Lucas decided that he needed to face his fear. Maybe if he just faced what was happening, it would all stop. Then, one night when he felt that strange sensation again, he got out of bed, carefully crawled to the floor and looked underneath. What he saw paralyzed him. Under the bed something was shining. This time it wasn't a man, but a pair of eyes, large and glassy, staring at him. Before he could react, he heard a hoarse, muffled voice whisper, "I'm still here." Lucas quickly walked away and ran to his parents' room. He tried to explain, but his words were shaky, disjointed, and his parents thought it was just a nightmare. He didn't return to his room that night. But things started to get worse. Objects in the room started moving on their own. Certain toys seemed out of place. The closet door opened by itself at dawn, and Lucas swore he heard low laughter coming from some dark corner of the room. The worried parents called a psychologist to try to help Lucas. But not even sessions with a professional seemed to solve the problem. The boy became isolated, no longer wanting to go into his own room, and every time he passed by the closed door, he felt sucked into a nightmare from which he could not escape. One day, the parents decided to make a change in the room, in an attempt to drive away the nightmares and give the space a feeling of renewal. While moving Lucas's bed, they found something underneath. It was a small, old, dusty diary, with pages yellowed by time. Neither of them had ever seen that diary before. When they opened it, they discovered that it belonged to a boy who had lived in that house many years ago. The last pages described the same fears that Lucas had been feeling. The boy had written about noises in the night, about a figure watching him from a corner of the room, and about eyes that glowed under the bed. The diary ended with a single sentence, scribbled so hard that the paper almost tore, "He never leaves." And that's when Lucas's parents realized that the fear gripping their son wasn't just a figment of imagination or a recent trauma. Something much older and darker was inhabiting that room, and Lucas had become its new victim. I hope you liked the story, because the third story is even more chilling. Just don't forget to see if you're already subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any terrifying stories. I hope you liked the story. It was a muggy night, the sky covered in clouds that seemed to steal the moonlight. In the front seat, the father drove steadily, totally focused on the road that seemed to have no end. The road was long and deserted, winding between dry plains and dark mountains. The constant noise of the engine was almost mesmerizing, but something was wrong. The children in the back seat were dozing, but the silence inside the car had attention, one of those strange sensations that only the most attentive people notice. The mother, sitting next to the father, watched the car's lights reflecting off the rocks at the side of the road, trying to ignore the slight chill that ran down her spine. That was when the father saw it. In the rearview mirror, two distant lights appeared. A car was approaching. At first he didn't pay much attention. After all, even on that deserted road, it was normal to pass another vehicle from time to time. But the car wouldn't pass. It was there, just a distance away, like a shadow in the darkness, always in the rearview mirror. "Do you want to pass?" the mother asked, trying to sound casual, but the slight tremor in her voice was noticeable. The father looked back in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed in concern. "I don't know," he replied, his voice lower than usual. The tension increased with every minute the car passed behind. The road was straight, with plenty of room to pass, but the vehicle was still going at exactly the same speed as them. It seemed like the driver was studying them, or worse yet, chasing them. The children began to wake up, rubbing their eyes and sensing the change in their surroundings. The oldest daughter, Clara, was the first to notice. "Dad, why won't that car pass? It's strange." The father quickly looked back in the rearview mirror, more nervous now. "I don't know, daughter. He must just be following me." But he knew it wasn't normal. Something was deeply wrong. Suddenly, the lights of the car behind them came on. The father and mother looked at each other without saying a word. And then the car accelerated. And for a moment it looked like it was going to overtake them. But at the last second, it slowed down again and returned to exactly the same position, like a predator playing with its prey. The mother's breathing was labored now. "This is not a coincidence. This guy is following us, he's playing with us," she said, her voice breaking with fear. The father began to press the accelerator harder, but the car behind him simply followed, without difficulty, without hurrying. They began to pass through a more mountainous area, where the road was full of sharp turns. There the darkness seemed thicker, as if the shadows of the mountains wanted to swallow the car whole. Each curve was a game of nerves. The car behind them turned perfectly and never lost track. It was then that, on one of the sharpest curves, the father tried a risky maneuver. He accelerated with all his might, trying to lose his pursuer. But instead of falling behind, the mysterious car came even closer, so much so that the headlights now illuminated the entire interior of the family car. The children were terrified, hugged on the benches, and their mother could barely breathe, looking back as if expecting to see something horrible. Suddenly, a light appeared in the distance, a point of hope. It was a police station. The father accelerated more, the car rocking on the sharp turns and the sound of the engine echoing off the surrounding rocks. "We'll get there, let's hold on," he said, not knowing if he was trying to convince the others or himself. When they finally arrived at the police station, the car that was chasing them disappeared. There was no sign of it anymore. It was as if it had never existed. The father stopped the car abruptly, and everyone got out with their hearts racing. The policeman, on duty that night, came out to help the family. They explained the situation, still unstable, and expected a simple explanation. Perhaps something like, "You were exaggerating, it was just another driver." But the policeman didn't seem surprised. "It's not the first time I've heard something like this around here," he said, frowning. "Some people report cars appearing out of nowhere and traveling for miles. Sometimes they disappear just as they appeared. Other times, well, some families aren't so lucky." Silence fell over everyone like a heavy blanket. The policeman looked at the dark road behind them and, without turning around, said something that made everyone's hearts freeze. "You guys were lucky to stop here. Often these cars follow families until they're far enough away from any help. And then, well, no one really knows what happens after that." The mother hugged the children tightly, while the father stared at the road with a lost look. He knew they had barely escaped, but that strange feeling, that uneasiness that accompanied them throughout the chase, was still there, trapped in his chest, as if something was waiting, lurking in the shadows, just waiting for a new chance to come back. Tell me which story made your hair stand on end? Tell me which one you liked the most? Because in the next video the story is even more chilling. Just don't forget to see if you're already subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any terrifying stories.